Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so it's another Halacha and Tanya. Last Wednesday night, we ended up not learning too much because we had a Fabrengen in honor of Heitevis instead. So let's go back to where we were in the laws of Muktzeh. Okay, so we learned there's different, different categories of Muktzeh. There's things which are totally Muktzeh, you can't move them for any reason. There are things that are like we learned Kli SheMelachto LeIsser. A vessel's primary use is for something forbidden. So that could be moved if you need the place or you need to use it for something permissible. Now we're learning about things which are completely Muktzeh. Muktzeh again means it's removed from the mind of the person, either because it's not considered a vessel, or as we're going to learn tonight, when things break. You have something breaks, and we'll learn various different things. So sometimes it's Muktzeh, and sometimes it's not Muktzeh. We're going to discuss the various different things. So let's say something breaks, okay, and it's not usable anymore. You can't use it at all. That is completely Muktzeh. Okay, that is Muktzeh. It cannot be used for anything whatsoever. It's completely Muktzeh on Shabbos for the entire Shabbos. Some things are usable, but for basically the same usage as when it was, but it's not. It's smaller. In other words, give you an example. You have a cutting board. Okay. A cutting board is a usable thing. What happens if a cutting board breaks in half? So it's still a cutting board, it's just much smaller. So then that wouldn't be Muktzeh at all because it's still a cutting board. It's still considered a utensil. Now, what happens though if they're usable but not for the original things? For instance, you have a garment. Okay, a garment is made to wear. Now on Shabbos, it rips, okay? So it's not usable anymore as a garment, but it's usable as a shmat, as a rag. I mean, you could still use it for things. So then the din is like this. If it breaks before Shabbos and Yom Tif, again, it's not Muktzeh because it could still be used on Shabbos for a rag, for something else. The same thing if it breaks on Shabbos, it's also not Muktzeh. Okay, so things that are still usable, even if it's not the same usage as it was before, is not considered Muktzeh because it's still usable. The only time it's really Muktzeh is when it's not usable at all, not for the original purpose, not for any purpose, then is completely Muktzeh. But, okay, we're going to get things. Now, what happens if something broke before Shabbos? Technically, it's still usable, but it broke before Shabbos and the owner threw it in the garbage. Okay, let's say a cutting board broke in half. Okay, technically, it's still usable, but the owner threw it into the garbage because he's not interested in using it anymore like that. So then the din is, because before Shabbos, they threw it into the garbage, when Shabbos entered, their mind was away from that utensil because they threw it out. So therefore, then that would stay Muktzeh the entire Shabbos. Okay? Because it's not the same usable vessel as it was to begin with, and the owner threw it away before Shabbos, that means when Shabbos began, he was not intending to use it, then it's Muktzeh. You're not allowed to take it out of the garbage. But if he threw it out on Shabbos, which means when Shabbos began, it was still usable, so then the din is you can take it out of the garbage. Okay, so very simple. If you throw something into the garbage, that's broken, but it's still usable, but it's broken. If you threw it in the garbage before Shabbos, it's completely Muktzeh. You cannot take it out of the garbage on Shabbos. If you threw it out on Shabbos, you'd be allowed to take it out of the garbage can. Now, what happens if something became dirty? Okay, it's a piece of clothing, it got dirty. So the owner, they threw it out. But it's still usable. It didn't tear, it didn't break. It's still the same piece of clothing. Or the owner thought, you know what, they're going through their closet, and which they should be doing on Shabbos, and they're throwing out old shirts, old blouses, old whatever. But they're not torn or not usable. So they threw them out. Before Shabbos, on Shabbos, it doesn't matter. But then it's not Muktzeh. Because even though the owner thought about not using it, it's still a proper utensil. It's still a piece of clothing that it always was. So if somebody, let's say, even by mistake, threw something into the garbage, but it's still usable, then it is not Muktzeh on Shabbos. They can take it out of the garbage and they can use it.
Rabbi Shusterman.
What?
The bulbs that you light candles with, if that breaks, like somebody throws something in the house and that bulb breaks and it's not usable, are we allowed to clean it up on Shabbos?
We learned already a little bit, but we're going to learn more about it.
Okay.
That's things that are muktzeh, but make a mess. It's dirty. It's called Geref Shorei. And especially in this case, it could be dangerous. And the laws of muktzeh don't apply. You're allowed to clean it up. Okay? But I'm just saying, if it's in a place where nobody's going, it's not, it's not a danger. It's not, then you wouldn't be allowed to clean it up. Now, anything, I'm going to give an introduction to this next concept. Anything which is attached to a building is not a vessel because it's part of the structure of the home. Like, for instance, on Shabbos, you open up a door and the door handle falls off. A door handle, because it's attached to the door, which is attached to the house, is halachically not considered a utensil. So if a door handle breaks, again, there's a lot of very practical dealing with this. If the door, anything attached to the, what do they call them here? The light, not this. They have a name for it. Walls. Okay, doors and windows are muktzeh. Okay. Like a window falls off on Shabbos. That's muktzeh on Shabbos. You can't put it back in. Can't put it back in because that's construction. But in addition to that, it's mamish muktzeh. Because
are you talking about a screen? Are you talking about a screen?
A screen or window, you're right. If a screen falls off on Shabbos, because it's not a utensil, because it's attached to the building, it's part of the building, a screen that falls off on Shabbos is completely muktzeh. You can't pick it up and put it away somewhere, not in the normal way of picking up. You might be able to kick it. We'll learn those dinim later. But you're right, the screen, a window, a door handle. I'll give you another very practical example. We mentioned it briefly last week, but again, last week we had a farbrengen and it was only mamish 5 minutes of halacha. But a button that falls off. Okay? A button falls off from your jacket, from your blouse, shirt, whatever. So generally speaking, I can tell you the general rule is you have to assume they're muktzeh. Because a button is not a button, it's not a keli. Now, if it's a button that is a unique button, it's a special type of button that you don't just find them anywhere, because your intent is to sew it back onto the garment, then the din is it's not muktzeh. But if it's a regular, simple button, a blouse, a shirt button, a jacket button many times, you can get them a dime a dozen, like they say. And therefore, it's not really something that you're necessarily going to plan to put it back on. So most poskim hold those are muktzeh. So you can't, if a button falls off, you can't pick it up and put it down somewhere. We're not learning about animals now. Animals we'll get to later. Animals are muktzeh on Shabbos, but we're not going to talk about that now. Now, if let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say a shoelace break, tears on Shabbos. Okay? So if the shoe is still wearable, then it's a shoe, even though it's not as comfortable as with a shoelace, but it's still wearable as a shoe. If it's wearable as a shoe, it's not muktzeh. But what happens sometimes, the whole bottom of the shoe falls off. The sole, the whole, then because it's not wearable, it's completely muktzeh because the shoe is not a shoe, it's a broken shoe. It's a broken shoe and it's muktzeh for the entire Shabbos. If you get it fixed, then next week it won't be muktzeh. But broken shoes, now, any broken shoe that you can still wear, even if it's not as comfortable, the din is it's not muktzeh. If you can't wear it, it is muktzeh. What did you want to ask?
He's about a window, if it came off the hinge or whatever, and if that's kind of dangerous, isn't it? If you can't put your window back and you're worried about a situation in your house?
It's a very big problem. You still can't put it back. Now, if a window fell out, you can't put back the window because that's biblically construction. That's baina. Forget muktzeh. It's actually construction because you're doing permanent construction by putting back the window. So you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Somebody might come into the house. I can't help you with that. You're still not allowed to. And again, if it fell off and it's dangerous, you can move it away out of danger.
Okay.
And the Alter Rebbe, we'll learn later, the Alter Rebbe holds that even real muktzeh, let's say you forgot that you're not allowed to move it and you picked it up, okay, and it's real muktzeh, according to the Alter Rebbe, you don't have to drop it on the spot. You could take it, because it's already in your hand, you can move it to a place that you want to move it to. But you can't pick up a window that falls off, a screen that falls off, a shoe that breaks and is not usable. The same thing with eyeglasses. If somebody, the eyeglass breaks in a way that you can't wear them, so the glasses are muktzeh. By the way, there's an interesting din. What happens if an eye lens falls out on Shabbos? So years ago, most of the eyeglasses, if you remember, would snap in. The lens snapped into the frame. Today, they don't have that anymore. There's screws, you have to screw it. So those would not be allowed to put back in on Shabbos. So then, the halacha would be, then the halacha would be, if the glasses are still wearable, they're not muktzeh. If they're not wearable, then the glasses would be muktzeh. And to give you another example, remember we learned a sewing needle, a needle that you sew with, is a Kli SheMelachto LeIsser. Its primary purpose is for something forbidden to sew. So therefore, if you need the place, you want to use it for something permissible, you would be allowed to use it, right? But what happens if the eye of the needle broke off? So now it's not even a needle anymore. Then it becomes completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason. Now, if it fell off before Shabbos and you're still using that needle, say to break open a seal or to open it, then like we learned, a rock, even though it's essentially muktzeh, but if you designated to hold the door as a door stopper or you're designated for permissible uses before Shabbos on a permanent basis, then you would be allowed to. Okay, but any mechanical thing, plumbing fixture, a faucet falls off on Shabbos, anything connected to the building is not allowed to be moved on Shabbos. It's completely muktzeh. Now, What happens if a mezuzah falls off? On, as somebody in the audience would say, Chas v'shalom, if the mezuzah would fall off on Shabbos, so because it's connected to the building, it would be Muktzeh. The only thing is, if the mezuzah is in danger of being defiled, like it fell on the floor, then you're allowed to move it. But let's say the mezuzah fell off onto a table. So it's not being defiled, nothing terrible is going to happen to the mezuzah. So then the din is, the mezuzah is muktzeh, you cannot move it. Because it's something connected to the building. It became designated as part of the building. It's not a keli, and therefore it's muktzeh. Completely muktzeh. Unless, again, if it's going to be defiled or disrespected, then you can pick it up and move it to a more a better, more respectable place. Again, we said before about clothing, as long as there's still clothing, okay, that are usable, even though you threw them out because they're soiled or there's whatever, but they're still wearable, usable, so then they're not muktzeh at all. Okay, now, I'm just asking, did we learn about raw meat, peels, shells? Do we learn that? I don't remember if we learned it in this class. Somebody remember?
Before we learned it.
We did
many years ago.
Years ago.
Yeah.
You said that if something is raw, like rice, we can't move it.
Right. Okay, let's talk about now.
Or potatoes.
Okay, what is considered? Yeah, but we mentioned that in passing. By the way, I remember we did mention it in passing. But let's learn the halachos of food. Okay, anything which is edible for humans or for animals, and it's something you would feed an animal, it's not muktzeh on Shabbos. Even something which is not normally eaten, but it could be eaten, people do eat it, so then it's not muktzeh on Shabbos. To give you an example, raw eggs are not muktzeh. Why? Because it's not uncommon. It's not very common, but it's not completely uncommon that people don't eat raw eggs. Chazanim, when they want to make their voice, they make a goggle-moggle, it's called. You take a raw egg and you mix a whole bunch of stuff in it. It's supposed to help. So because raw eggs are eaten by a number of people, so raw eggs are not muktzeh on Shabbos. Raw meat, and again, in the time of the Gemara, people ate raw meat. People ate raw meat in the time of the Gemara. So therefore, and they would chew it, like they have today beef jerky. But people in the time of the Gemara does, people would chew on raw meat. So then in those days, raw meat was not muktzeh. Nowadays, that people don't eat raw meat, so raw meat is muktzeh because it's not edible. It's edible for a dog, but again, nobody's going to give glatt kosher $100 a pound meat, probably what it costs soon, I don't know, to give it to the dogs. So it's not, yes, it's technically edible for a dog, but you're not going to give it to your dog because it's too expensive. So then it's not considered dog food. By the way, if somebody has an animal, a dog, and they have dog food, the dog food is takanat muktzeh because it's edible for the dog, cat food, whatever it may be. So then that food would not be muktzeh. But nowadays, again, this is not Kabbalah. If people will start eating raw meat, I think it's called tart or something, I don't know. Some people are starting to eat it, then halachically it wouldn't be muktzeh. But as of now, people don't eat raw meat. And sushi is fish. And that's why an interesting thing. Years ago, pre-sushi times, people didn't eat raw fish. So then raw fish was muktzeh. Today, if it's raw fish that people eat, and sushi is a lot of times raw fish, So then it wouldn't be muktzeh, raw fish, because people eat raw fish. But therefore, we mentioned, last time, whenever we spoke about it, that you have to be very careful before Shabbos. That if, let's say, you have ice cream in the freezer or dessert in the freezer, and you have raw meat in front of the freezer, in front of the ice cream, let's say, and you want to get to the ice cream, you have to keep in mind that that raw meat is muktzeh. You need the place to get to it. It's not going to help for this. This muktzeh is completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. So you have to organize before Shabbos. You have to keep in mind, like you have a lot of other things in mind, that if you're planning to take something out of the freezer, that you have to make sure there's nothing in the way. Is it based on what people usually eat or the place where you are? It doesn't have to be necessarily the place you are. It's something that generally in your country people eat it. So then it's not muktzeh, even though maybe in your area they don't eat it. Obviously, smoked fish, herring, salted fish, which people eat, again, that's not muktzeh because it's mamish edible. Okay, now, if somebody, let's say, many people make raw dough, and then they put it into the freezer. Okay, and then when they want to make challah, they'll take it out, defrost it, and make it into challah. Raw dough is not edible. And because raw dough is not edible, it's muktzeh. Raw dough is muktzeh. So again, if you have raw dough in the freezer, you have to be careful that it's muktzeh, you're not allowed to move it. Uncooked beans, rice, all those types of things, or popcorn, raw popcorn, okay? The kernels of the corn kernels that you're planning to pop. Now, obviously, ready-made popcorn is not muktzeh, but raw popcorn kernels are muktzeh because they're not edible. Not edible, it's a mamish muktzeh. Any food that needs, processed food that needs to be cooked, is completely muktzeh on Shabbos. Vegetables, raw vegetables, cooked vegetables are not muktzeh. But raw vegetables, so if raw vegetables are eaten, like carrots, celery, onions, all those types of vegetables that people eat raw, then obviously it's not muktzeh. But if it's a vegetable that people don't eat raw, like artichokes or potatoes, or things like turnips, sweet potatoes, those are completely muktzeh. Okay? Now, the halacha says like this. What happens, that usually you cook them, but many people eat them raw. For instance, cauliflower, broccoli, peas, spinach, squash, string beans, mushrooms, bean sprouts, and the like, that people put into salads. So even though most of the time they're cooked, people cook them, but the fact that many people eat them raw, so automatically they're not yom tov. They're not muktzeh. Why I say yom tov? I'm looking at the next line. Now, this din of raw vegetables being muktzeh, or uncooked food, or even dough, or any of these things, and yom tov are not muktzeh. They're only muktzeh on Shabbos. Because Shabbos, they're not edible because you can't cook. Yom tov, though, you are allowed to cook. And Yom tov, you are allowed to make challah. And Yom tov, you could pop popcorn. From a pre-existing flame, obviously. So therefore, none of those things are actually muktzeh on Yom tov because they are edible. Shabbos, they're not edible because you can't cook them. And you can't eat them raw. But Yom tov, because you're allowed to eat it, then the cooking is not a problem. Now, tea bags, again, because tea bags are allowed to be used on Shabbos. Don't we eat uncooked vegetables? If a guy serves it, since it's not cooked. Yes, vegetables, any vegetables which are eaten raw, even if a guy cooks them, they're not a problem. It's just vegetables that are not eaten raw. Then if a non-Jew cooks them, it is a problem of a guy cooking it. For instance, if a guy will bake a potato or make French fries, then it would be a problem for a Jew to eat it. French fries, I don't know. French fries are debatable. But somebody just the raw potato bakes it or cooks and makes mashed potatoes, those would be a problem of bishul akum. Okay, now here's another interesting thing. We mentioned this very briefly again last week. We learned for 5 minutes and we went to the Fabrengen. But bones which are not edible on Shabbos, this is a very important, very practical din, are Muktzeh on Shabbos. Now, that means even though it's a bone, it's a pit from a fruit that you just ate. Okay, so let's say you have a peach, okay? You had a peach or nectarine or something like that. Now, the pit is not edible. Watermelon pits are edible. Some fruits, people do eat the pits. So then the pits are not muktzeh. But fruits and vegetables that people don't eat the pit, once you finish eating, that pit becomes muktzeh. In other words, if you're eating nuts on Shabbos that have a hard shell, okay, I'm not talking about sunflower seeds. Sunflower seeds, a lot of people eat the shells. There's a lot of, these types of, like, that people eat the shells. So then sunflower, I said sunflower seed.
Nobody eats sunflower seed pots.
They do. Many people do. The Israelis do. And the Russians do. I'm not talking about pistachio nuts. Those are not edible. So, in fact, Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur, he's very, very strict about not eating walnuts on Shabbos. And Alter Rebbe says eating walnuts, unless if they're shelled before Shabbos. But to eat a walnut in the shell on Shabbos, Alter Rebbe says you should not do it. Why? He says 2 reasons. Number one, when you crack open the nut, there's the skin in between the nuts, the membrane, and it's not edible. And therefore, you're going to take it out and separate the bad from the good when you really are only allowed to separate the good from the bad. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe says that's problem number 1. And the problem number 2, the Alter Rebbe says, and that would apply to any single nut with a hard shell that's not edible. Secondly, once you finish eating the nut, the peel becomes muktzeh. And everybody knows that when you're eating nuts during the week and you have the peels in front of you on the table, people play with them. And the problem is they're completely muktzeh.
Peels of fruit also?
No, peels of fruit that are edible, like even an orange, the peel is edible. People make food out, marmalade out of it. People make jelly out of it. Inside white, many people eat. An apple, a pear, but certain peels are not edible, like the shells of a nut. So again, if it's an edible shell or peel, it's not muktzeh.
How do you eat a banana?
A banana, as a banana peel is taka muktzeh. So how do you eat a banana on Shabbos? How do you eat eggs on Shabbos? So later I want to go to Tanya, but just this last concept. The minig is, when you peel, you want to eat an egg on Shabbos. The minig is you peel it straight over the garbage can. When you peel a banana, the minig is in Yiddish houses, you peel it right over the garbage. Or what they do is they'll peel it directly into a napkin, and then it becomes what we learned, Gadif Shalvei, and then you can pick up the napkin and throw it out. But the play with it is not a problem. Now, are you allowed to peel a banana and hold the peel while you're eating the banana? The answer is yes, because then it's a part of the food. It's bottled to the food. But once you finish eating, there's no food to be bottled to. So then it would be a problem. Okay, we're going to stop here, and then we're going to go to Tanya.